Hello and welcome everyone to today's lesson. So today we'll be looking at the speaking style of current US President Donald Trump and his distinct speaking style. So I have a few excerpts of some of his speeches that I'll play right now, and afterwards we'll take a look at them and analyze them. So let's get started.
Last year, we, and I say we, because we are a team, would have received almost 14 million votes, the most in the history of the Republican Party, and that the Republican Party would get 60% more votes than it received 8 years ago. Who would have believed this? Who would have believed this? The Democrats, on the other hand, received 20% fewer votes than they got 4 years ago. Not so good, not so good. Together, we will lead our party back to the White House, and we will lead our country back to safety, prosperity, and peace. We will be a country of generosity and warmth, but we will also be a country of law and order. Our convention occurs at a moment of crisis for our nation. The attacks on our police and the terrorism of our cities threaten our very way of life. Any politician who does not grasp this danger is not fit to lead our country. Americans watching this address tonight have seen the recent images of violence in our streets and the chaos in our communities. Many have witnessed this violence personally. Some have even been its victims. I have a message for all of you. The crime and violence that today afflicts our nation will soon, and I mean very soon, come to an end. Beginning on January 20th of 2017, safety will be restored. The most basic duty of government is to defend the lives of its own citizens. Any government that fails to do so is a government unworthy to lead. It is finally time for a straightforward assessment of the state of our nation. I will present the facts plainly and honestly. We cannot afford to be so politically correct anymore. So if you want to hear the corporate spin, the carefully crafted lies, and the media myths, the Democrats are holding their convention next week. Go there. But here at our convention, there will be no lies. We will honor the American people with the truth and nothing else. These are the facts. Decades of progress made in bringing down crime are now being reversed by this administration's rollback of criminal enforcement. Homicides last year increased by 17% in America's 50 largest cities. That's the largest increase in 25 years. In our nation's capitals, killings have risen by 50%. They're up nearly 60% in nearby Baltimore. In the president's hometown of Chicago, more than 2,000 people have been the victim of shootings this year alone, and almost 4,000 have been killed in the Chicago area since he took office. The number of police officers killed in the line of duty has risen by almost 50% compared to this point last year. Nearly 180,000 illegal immigrants with criminal records ordered deported from our country are tonight roaming free to threaten peaceful citizens. The number of new illegal immigrant families who have crossed the border so far this year already exceeds the entire total from 2015. They are being released by the tens of thousands into our communities with no regard for the impact on public safety or resources. One such border crosser was released and made his way to Nebraska. There, he ended the life of an innocent young girl named Sarah Root. She was 21 years old and was killed the day after graduating from college with a 4.0 grade point average, #1 in her class. Her killer was then released a second time, and he is now a fugitive from the law. I've met Sarah's beautiful family, but to this administration, their amazing daughter was just one more American life that wasn't worth protecting. No more. One more child to sacrifice on the order and on the altar of open borders. What about our economy? Again, I will tell you the plain facts that have been edited out of your nightly news and your morning newspaper. Nearly 4 in 10 African American children are living in poverty, while 58% of African American youth are now not employed. 2 million more Latinos are in poverty today than when President Obama took his oath of office less than 8 years ago. Another 14 million people have left the workforce entirely. Household incomes are down more than $4,000 since the year 2000. That's 16 years ago. Our trade deficit in goods reached nearly, think of this, our trade deficit is $800 billion. Yet, think of that, $800 billion. Last year alone, we're going to fix that. The budget is no better. President Obama has almost doubled our national debt to more than $19 trillion and growing. And yet, what do we have to show for it? Our roads and bridges are falling apart. Our airports are third world condition. And 43 million Americans are on food stamps. Now, let us consider the state of affairs abroad. Not only have our citizens endured domestic disaster, but they've lived through one international humiliation after another, one after another. We all remember the images of our sailors being forced to their knees by their Iranian captors at gunpoint. This was just prior to the signing of the Iran deal, which gave back to Iran $150 billion and gave us absolutely nothing. It will go down in history as one of the worst deals ever negotiated. Another humiliation came when President Obama drew a red line in Syria, and the whole world knew it meant absolutely nothing. In Libya, our consulate, the symbol of American prestige around the globe, was brought down in flames. America is far less safe, and the world is far less stable than when Obama made the decision to put Hillary Clinton in charge of America's foreign policy. Let's defeat her in November. Okay?
So now let's take a look and analyze at some of the things that we saw in that Donald Trump speech. So one of the first things that I've noticed with Donald Trump throughout a majority of his speeches is that he has a very casual tone to his voice that's not very typical of a politician's. Usually a politician will be very more somewhat measured, trying to give a speech to a larger audience, while Donald Trump has somewhat of this sort of speaking style. He also has his own distinct speaking style in that he often has a very one-on-one sort of casual conversational tone instead. What I mean by this is that very often it will almost seem as if Donald Trump is talking to a close friend of his, that he is talking to someone who he can trust and someone who he can speak to, where he will very often forego using any very extravagant language and will very often choose to use the most direct and most simple language in order to get across his views and get across his words. And this both has advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantage being that in a political landscape, it will very often seem as if he is unprofessional. Now, whether or not he is or isn't really of the question, but when one is choosing to use more simple words, it can very often lend itself towards the idea that one actually doesn't know those words or is not familiar enough to use those words, and that may lend itself to seeming unprofessional. However, the advantage that can be seen is that someone who chooses to use this casual sort of tone will often be able to connect better with the audience because of this one-on-one casual tone. People will feel as if the speaker, in this case Donald Trump, is speaking directly to them. And that obviously engages the audience, because if someone is basically making it seem as if he is speaking to each and every individual in the audience, those people will feel much more engaged because they'll feel as if it's a one-on-one conversation, which is much easier of a conversation to get into. Even if the audience isn't actually able to speak back to Donald Trump, they feel as if they are more having a conversation than listening to a speech. And really, the effects of this can't be overstated because it is actually a very strong device and is very often not used in politics because, for the most part, politicians will choose to use this more professional tone where it is more of giving a speech than having a one-on-one conversation. But Donald Trump is different in this respect because he's probably one of the only politicians in modern day history to consistently use this type of tonality. And I think it can be very effective if it is used properly. And I think this speech in particular was actually a pretty good blend of both of them. He had very specific times where he was very clearly trying to have a more speech-oriented, a more formal type of speech, but also he had very distinct parts where he was almost as if talking to a good friend of his and explaining his views on whatever he was talking about. So with that blend, I think he's almost getting the best of both worlds here. He's connecting with the audience on the individual level and also maintaining that presidential, professional, and formal outlook that everyone expects from a presidential candidate. Additionally, Donald Trump has decent hand gestures. He tends to use them when he is emphasizing points, but that is usually the entirety of his speech. So he is very often using his hands in order to emphasize things. He uses both hands in equal amounts. So for the most part, it shows a fairly good mastery of the speaking technique. Not one that is typical to politicians, but still one that shows that he is very clearly comfortable when speaking in front of an audience. And overall, both of these two things combined together really lend itself to having Donald Trump have a very distinct and somewhat unique speaking style, but it really lends itself to his personality and it works for him specifically, even if it is very different from many other politicians' type of speaking styles. It specifically works for him. So actually it can be used if it is effective for that specific person and that person is capable of pulling it off. Now with that said, everyone, thank you so much for watching. If this video helped you in some sort of way or if you learned something from it, please leave a like and subscribe for future content, and also comment down below on what future videos you would like to see. With that said, everyone, thank you for watching and have a great day.